All right, welcome back to Third String Podcast. We took last week off, and hopefully now with our bellies full of turkey and stuffing, we're ready to give this another whirl. So I'm Zach, here with Pete and Ishan. Guys, welcome back to Third String Podcast.
Hey, good to be back.
All right, well, we've got a lot to talk about today, and we're going to get to our heart of the order soon enough, where we're going to talk mostly about the college football playoff. But before we do that, I want to just open up things with our first segment, Off the Bench, and talk about some stuff that's been on our minds. And the thing that's been on my mind most recently is actually going back to the baseball world. So I know we're in the off season. It's been a really quiet off season. It's actually been one of the most quiet off seasons in the past couple of decades, just as far as number of transactions in the off season. But one thing that's on everyone's radar is this guy Shohei Ohtani, who is playing in Japan right now, and everyone's excited about him because he could be the first real two-way player of the modern era, because he is hitting home runs like Barry Bonds in Japan, but he's also pitching extremely well. And so people are interested in him being in that dual role in the major leagues. And there was some question about whether or not he would do it because of collective bargaining agreement rules that have really limited the cap of his possible salary here. But it's becoming more realistic. He said he still wants to come, even if he's going to be making pennies on the dollar for what he could be making next year if he made the jump then. But it looks like he's coming over, and he's released what looks like his short list of teams that could hire him. That includes basically a bunch of West Coast teams like the Dodgers, Giants, Padres, Mariners, and then the Rangers. And the Rangers are on the list because I presume because they have the largest amount of international bonus pool money to give out, so he could potentially have the most lucrative contract with the Rangers. But his ceiling is still going to be pretty low, around the $3 to $4 million mark. But it looks like he wants to stay West Coast, and it looks like he wants to possibly go to a small market team on the West Coast, maybe like the Padres, maybe like the Mariners. So it'll be really exciting to see this play out. See guys like AJ Preller and Jerry DiPoto go after him for his services. But I'm just really excited about this guy coming in. First of all, someone who's clearly not just playing for the money, because he's turning down what would be a more lucrative contract next year if he made the switch. And second, just a guy who's coming in and doing something that no one's done in baseball in a long, long time, being a real two-way player. I don't know if he can do it. I'm sort of skeptical of his chances, but I'm really excited to see that possibility play out.
I just want to say you missed the Angels and Cubs on his list of finalists. The Cubs are the other non-West Coast team.
I didn't see the Cubs on that list. Really? Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm looking at it again. I totally missed that the first time. Yeah. All right. I guess Theo Epstein has not had his final say.
Man, how much fun would it be to watch Theo Epstein try to do something with him too? I think even if you're an international player, the Cubs have to look exciting. I mean, it's such a young ball club. I mean, Mike Trout is kind of a pull on the West Coast, but you gotta love the young guys in Chicago if you're looking at that list as well. So I think that's a good call out. I wasn't tracking either. You guys think that he's actually the Japanese Babe Ruth, as everyone seems to be calling him right now?
I think it's hard to project. I've seen some scouts say that they're worried about him hitting the inside fastball, and that his offensive numbers might not project as well. It seems like the pitching is pretty airtight.
Yeah, I'm also concerned about if the pitching is airtight. Will an AL team like the Rangers or the Angels or the Mariners really want him in the batter's box day in and day out? Like, will they play him in a DH role even if he's not pitching? I'm not convinced.
Seems like there's a strong incentive to say they will, whether or not they plan to. And certainly I think you got to give him a chance, because if he puts up offensive numbers, anything like he's putting up in Japan, close to a 300 average, takes a good amount of walks, gets on base, hits a lot of 20, 30-plus homers a year. Like, that's, if he can translate 80% of that, then he's certainly worthy of being in the lineup every day that he's not pitching. So I guess we'll have to see how it goes. One plug I'd like to give for the Cubs is that Joe Madden has put pitchers like Travis Wood and Pedro Strop in left field occasionally to work his bullpen late in the game, and especially in extra inning games. So Cubs have some experience with a tinkering manager working pitchers into other parts of the lineup. So
yeah, very true. And I think it's exciting to think about the possibilities as guys like Madden show what you can do with a less conventional lineup card or defensive alignment. It's interesting to think about what that could look like. But I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm skeptical about this guy being a true two-way player, but it's hard to deny the numbers like Ishan, you were saying. I mean, 2016 and 2017, he hit 322 and 332 batting average. His OPS was 1.004 in 2016, which is just absurd, and 0.942 in 2017. And in those years, his pitching, obviously really good as well. In 2016, his ERA was 1.86. In 2017, it was 3.2. So he's doing well. He hit 22 home runs in 2016 as well. And they have a much shorter season in Japan, so that was across 104 games. So essentially 1 home run for every 4 games he plays. Pretty impressive.
So I also read they have
think
6-man rotations in Japan. So one thing is that the team signing him, if they want him to be a true starter, they might have to go to a 6-man rotation.
Yeah, good point.
Well, and I think you got to play the age factor in here as well. That, yeah, the rotation going specifically 5 to 7 days, messing with that rotation. I think they're on a 7-day rotation for the most part in Japan, as we were saying. But also his age, only coming across at 23. I think that there could be some... He's going to need a team who can not only figure out how to use him, but he's going to need a team that has some good leadership. So I like what we said about the Rangers early on, but I think it's worth noting that he's still a very young guy, very inexperienced in terms of kind of those high-pressure situations that the Cubs, maybe the Rangers here in the next couple of years, the Dodgers, the Padres even could be looking for as they're looking to pick him up and where he decides to go ultimately.
Yeah, and just on that topic, I'm going to have a question for you guys on the shootout later on this show, so stay tuned for that. But before we move on to the heart of the order, do you guys have anything for off the bench here?
I just want to say that I think it's cool Ohtani's got these small market teams on his list. I think it'd be a lot of fun if he ended up with the Padres or the Mariners. I guess I'm not sure San Diego and Seattle are really small markets, but they're certainly not traditional baseball powers.
And certainly smaller than, the New Yorks or the Philadelphias or Chicagos of the world. So I am confused by how the small market and Chicago Cubs alignment works, because one of those things is not like the other, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are some very big market teams on that list, so it's pretty clear that he's not only going for a small market, but I agree that it'd be neat to see him go there.
Well, and he even said in an interview that money's not an option to him, which is kind of hilarious to think about because he's going to make tons of money wherever he goes. But I think it's interesting that he looks like he's playing for the perfect fit instead of the biggest contract, which maybe that'll change here in 5 years if he's truly the Japanese Babe Ruth. But For right now, it's fun that he's going to go where he thinks he can fit and win. So hopefully the younger generation that we've talked about a couple times on this show really is changing baseball for the better.
I love the way he's been on executives' radar for so long that he knows he'll have, any one of the 30 executives fawning over him to come over to the U.S. And because of that, he had his agents send out a letter to all the teams saying basically like, compile your resumes and try to sell us or try to sell Ohtani on why he should come to you. And then he'll make his decision. I thought that was pretty hilarious. And you can find out like the criteria that he wanted. It was pretty interesting what he was interested in. But all right, any other segments moving on from Ohtani for off the bench before we go to heart of the order?
Hey, real quick, Zach, I know you're a golf fan. What were your thoughts on Tiger over the weekend? Good to see Tiger back. As I was traveling this weekend, so walking through airports, it was fun to see Tiger playing. I know everyone has pretty mixed feelings on him, but what do you guys think on Tiger's return? Yeah,
it's hard not to have mixed feelings on Tiger, but I am all about the comeback. You gotta love a good comeback from injury or personal issues or whatever. And I mean, Tiger is such a competitor. He's certainly had some character issues to work through in his career. The latest,
just one or two.
Yeah, I know, right? The latest, driving under the influence or whatever the term was, if there were narcotics involved. I mean, that was just sort of sad. I mean, this guy's clearly a shell of his former self, physically speaking, in terms of the back surgeries he's endured, and he's on medicine for his back pain, and can't operate motor vehicles while you're on that. I mean, it's just kind of sad to see what Tiger's become. So good to see him back out there on the course. Pretty exciting to see him competing through the first day and a half, and then pretty familiar to see him kind of slip on the back end of the course there. But yeah, it's I guess it's sort of nostalgic for me in a way, like seeing what Tiger once was and what he was as I was growing up. But sad to realize that I don't think that Tiger's ever coming back.
I agree. I think the game is going to be better with him in it. Kind of like we talk about the flashy players in baseball or football or basketball. I think Tiger is going to bring some viewership back and maybe some excitement. I think your young guys in golf are still the future of the sport. Absolutely. Like you said, Tiger's not going to come back and win 4 majors in a year ever again. But
Right.
he might compete in a couple of them, and that's going to be good. But the back didn't look like it was too much of an issue yesterday. I don't know how he's feeling today, but he was making drives of like 270 yards yesterday, like with the 2-iron. It was crazy. I mean, I'm a terrible golfer, so I'm just in awe.
I'm horrendous. Yeah, you do not want to go on the golf course with me. I mean, I can do okay at mini golf, but you put me on a real course, it's not pretty.
I once threw a driver at Top Golf. I don't know if you can top that, but
I almost made a Top Golf joke. Like Top Golf is like the extent of my talent level, but it sounds like you and I should go to Top Golf. This needs to happen.
well, you know me. I go there for the beer drinking and the socializing, and then I try not to make a complete fool of myself.
Right. That's generally my number one goal whenever I'm near a golf club. Just like try not to let anyone see how absolutely incompetent with this piece of equipment I am. All right. So let's go to the heart of the order. All right, this is pretty obvious, right? The big news of this week is the college football playoff. We had a lot of action in conference championships over the weekend, and we've definitely got to break this down and talk about this. So, the CFP rankings are in. Number 1, Clemson. My first question for you guys, is Clemson the true number 1? Is this absolutely indisputable?
I think Clemson should be the number 1. I think their win over Auburn is comparable to Oklahoma's win over Ohio State, and Clemson's loss was a little bit fluky. It was a Friday night. Their quarterback missed the second half. It was against a worse team than Oklahoma's loss, Syracuse versus Iowa State, but overall, I think Clemson's got a better resume, and they're probably a better team. And they're the defending national champions, so I don't think last year should count, but, a little extra kick from that maybe.
Sure.
Totally agree. I think Clemson, I don't want to say unanimous because obviously that's never true, but yeah, their strength of schedule. I think they're consistent matchups this year. I think Oklahoma had some good matchups, but you look at Clemson playing Miami. I'm sorry, not Miami. Midseason, obviously they played them in the ACC championship and blew them out, but Clemson had very dominant wins over Virginia Tech, pretty dominant win over Auburn. I mean, Clemson just showed up every week with the exception of that Syracuse game, which totally agree, Sean. I think that was a little fluky, but it just looked like Clemson was the most complete team kind of going through the year. That we can get into this as we go on, but so many of these other top 8 teams were inconsistent at times. I don't think you can really argue that with Clemson. They had a couple injuries on the defensive line. The defense was still stout. They have Kelly Bryant come in to replace Deshaun Watson. Tons of questions on him. He is as solid as it gets this year. That I don't really think there was anyone who could legitimately challenge that number 1 spot right now. Obviously, Alabama has something to say about that here in a month, but totally agree, Sean.
Yeah, and I've got to eat crow and agree with you guys. It was about 3 or 4 weeks ago that we talked about Clemson and Miami in the context of ACC championship, who would get that. And I just did not have much faith in Kelly Bryant and the Clemson offense. Obviously, Clemson has a formidable defense. Everyone knew that going into the year. That's not been a surprise. But I've been surprised by the Clemson offense. And you guys may remember me saying that if Miami and Clemson faced off, I thought Miami would be Clemson. I was obviously gravely mistaken given the outcome of the ACC championship game. So I'm much more of a Clemson believer after that Miami game because I think that is maybe apart from the Auburn game, the toughest foe they've faced all year, and they just made Miami look like child's play. So I have to agree.
It's like Miami forgot to pack the playbook and instead brought the turnover chain.
It really was. Yeah. Oh man.
It was an incredibly awful game.
It was bad to watch. I mean, I didn't even watch most of it because it was just not competitive, not fun. Okay, so we've got Clemson at number 1, Oklahoma at number 2, Georgia at number 3 after its revenge win over Auburn in the SEC championship. And then Alabama at number 4. Now, I invite your comments on 2 and 3, but I'm really curious about number 4. I don't know if you guys were watching the CFP release show on ESPN. There was so much drama and buildup, and it was just really it dragged on and on. But when 4 came out, That was the big one. No one was sure if it was going to be Alabama or Ohio State. I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts? Is Alabama the rightful number 4 here?
I think it is an embarrassment that Alabama is in the college football playoff. They did not play even a top 50 schedule. Their best win was against LSU, who lost to Troy. The entire SEC West just did not get enough credit for not having any depth as a conference. If you guys want to know the best, this is the full list of teams, of Power 5 teams with winning records that the SEC West beat this year as a division. Here's the list.
Good list,
right,
solid.
They did not beat a Power 5 team with a winning record as a division. So Alabama lost to Auburn, so they didn't beat the one other truly top team in their division. And the two teams they played from the East, Vanderbilt and Tennessee, won a combined one SEC game. So Alabama is in this, to be clear, purely based on reputation and based on an arbitrary idea that they're a great team and deserve to be in there because of the names on the front of their jersey. If Ole Miss had Alabama's resume with the exact same season, the exact same players, there's a 0% chance anyone would be talking about them getting in. And I think a good example of that is that no one talks about Wisconsin getting in. Yep. Everyone was like, the Big Ten West is so terrible. Wisconsin, just like Alabama, was a one-loss non-conference champion. They played in a conference championship game, and their only loss was in that game, a game in which Alabama didn't even make it to. And, the Big Ten West wasn't good either, but why should we believe that Wisconsin's wins against Northwestern and Michigan, who are 9-3 and 8-4, were any worse than Alabama's wins over LSU and who's the other team that was 8-4? Texas A&M? I don't remember. Anyways, there's no reason to think that the SEC West had any teams that really. Oh, Mississippi State was 8-4. There's no and Alabama won a close game against them. So there's no reason to think the SEC West is better than the Big Ten West. They're two divisions that collectively accomplished nothing. So Alabama did not win a division that was not good. They did not beat a team in the top 15, and so they shouldn't really have been a serious contender, in my view.
So you think Ohio State should have been in place of them?
I think that, yeah.
And so you would privilege Ohio State over Wisconsin just because of the Big Ten championship?
Yeah, they just beat them head-to-head literally 12 hours before.
Right.
Right. I see a case for – so I think Wisconsin would have had a case over Ohio State like Ohio State had over Penn State last year if Wisconsin had a marquee non-conference win. So I think Ohio State over Penn State last year made sense because of the Oklahoma win.
Right.
And Wisconsin didn't have anything like that to really lay its case
strengthen
on.
its resume, yeah. What do you think, Pete?
So I think Alabama got in solely because of Ohio State getting in last year. I don't think the committee thought that they could go against the precedent that they set last year with how Ohio State got in. I know that Ohio State team last year had a better resume than Alabama has this year, but overall, it's very clear that the committee was more interested in rewarding wins and losses than strictly the conference championship. And we can debate the conference championship, the 6-team, 8-team playoff, whatever it wants to be going forward. But I think the committee valued consistency both across years as well as this year more than anything else. Ohio State lost 31 points to Iowa. I know it was at Iowa, but I think just based on the eye test, that pseudo disqualified Ohio State the entire time. I think the committee actually told us it was going to be Alabama the entire way through, where even as Alabama didn't have the most consistent schedule, they were always in the top 1 or 2 from Halloween night when we got these first rankings. I think the committee the entire time was kind of laying the path for this and making it clear that Alabama had to kind of shoehorn themselves out of the top 4 rather than in because they were already in. I think, yes, agreeing with you, Ishan, it was based a lot on reputation. But I think that Alabama team honestly was more consistent than Ohio State. Ohio State, has the bigger wins, and it gets to be a really slippery slope if we start playing eye test, consistency, all that. But Ohio State not showing up against Iowa definitely hurt them. Losing at home to Oklahoma, kind of having the ups and downs where they consistently were barely in games. I mean, they barely got by Indiana. They barely got by Michigan. I I don't think the committee really had a good way forward on this one because they've set these rules so subjectively in terms of who gets in that I think that they were trying to stick more towards the overall integrity of the college football playoff, regardless if you think they met that or not. I think that's what they were trying to do more than anything else. So I don't love Alabama being in. I actually think Alabama was the better choice over Ohio State because I think Alabama can compete more against Clemson than Ohio State can. And that's not a great reason to put them in. But I think that's what the committee was going for, is who is the stronger team, who will be more consistent. We know the product we're getting from them more. Zach, over to you, bud.
Yeah, I think you guys have hit the nail on the head. I think you're absolutely right. Pete, I agree with your points about what the committee was thinking. And Ishan, I agree with your points about how Alabama does not deserve its spot right now. And I think it's interesting that in advance of the Big Ten championship, everyone was thinking this is going to decide Ohio State's fate. And really, Ohio State's fate was clearly already sealed because it did the best that it could in defeating Wisconsin pretty handily and still didn't get a spot. So really, the Big Ten championship was only about Wisconsin's fate. And if Wisconsin slipped at all and got their first loss of the season, they would just lose that spot to Alabama. And then I think it's kind of crazy too that there were 3 SEC teams in the mix for these 4 spots in the CFP. Right up until the final hour, Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama, which I think just goes towards an implicit SEC bias on the part of everyone who is anyone in college football these days. And to Ishan's point, I think it's relevant to point out that the SEC West is super weak, and Alabama does not deserve a privileged place just because it has a strong conference record in the SEC West. So I'm in agreement.
So here's the problem going forward is, are you now going to, so Alabama could have had a huge win. Obviously FSU season came off the rails so quickly, but remember FSU was number 3 when they played them. So the intent was there to schedule all these big time teams. If you're an athletic director going forward, what are you doing here? Are you scheduling big games, or are you trying to schedule non-conference easy wins to get me up to the win level?
Well, the committee has consistently not rewarded intent in past years, so I don't think the FSU game can or should count for anything. I just want to say a little bit more on that conference comparison. Yeah, the SEC West, not only did they not beat any good Power 5 teams, they had a lot of bad Power 5 losses. Texas A&M losing to UCLA, who's 4-5 in the Pac-12. Ole Miss lost to Cal, who's 2-7 in the Pac-12. So, like, this idea that some conferences are better than others is based solely on people's priors and people's subjective opinions. Like Pete was saying, I think I agree completely with Pete's explanation of why the committee made the choice they did. And what I would say about that is that if that is the explanation, then they just shouldn't play the season. Like, if the explanation is by watching this team, I think they're a better matchup against that team, then just, like, pick the 4 teams that you like the most at the beginning of the year and, like, I mean, obviously, I'm making a rhetorical point. I don't literally mean this is, like, close to what
I was like, dude, we don't have anything to talk about if we do that.
I'm saying if they literally are just going to choose the team they think looks the best on the field, then, like, watch the spring games and choose the Final Four then. Like, it should be based on something that actually happened on the field. And that's why I think, ultimately, this is always going to be a problem until the selection process has an objective component. There needs to be
we get rid of preseason rankings.
Well, that would be awesome, too.
That would be great, yeah. Good step.
The bias towards, like you were saying, they're looking across multiple years. The bias towards the teams that have won in the past, the teams that people expect to be good, it's always going to be there as long as it's subjective. So I think the only solution is to add, like, hard and fast requirements. Like, you have to win your conference, or an 18 playoff or a 16 playoff, where all 5 conference champions automatically get in, and then there's a wild card or 3 wild cards.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, because I think, like you said, Ishan, there's always going to be a subjective element, right? You're always going to have disagreement on who's the most deserving, etc. But you can get around that a little bit by having an 18 playoff in which you have 5 bids automatic for each of the conference champions, and then you have maybe 1 bid for a non-Power 5, and then you have 2 sort of at large for the most deserving teams, and you can have the committee decide on those. But the committee decide basically arbitrarily, or what often seems like an arbitrary decision, on the top 4 teams in college football based on these factors that are supposedly clearly delineated, but in practice are not. It's crazy. I'd much rather have an 18 playoff with the automatic bids for conference champions from the Power 5 conferences.
And I think that's kind of the silver lining of this, in my view, is that we're only going to get to a situation like that once every conference feels like they've been screwed, or a majority of the conferences feel like they've been screwed.
Right.
The Pac-12 already feels like that every year. No one watches the games. They end at 2 a.m. No one talks about them. The Big 12 has already felt like that in the past, with having one-loss conference champions miss it in the Baylor, TCU, Ohio State debate year.
And Big Ten's feeling that this year.
Yeah, and so I think now we're approaching that point where it's going to hit a tipping point eventually, and people are going to want it to be more objective, because these teams don't play each other across conferences. There's like a handful of non-conference games that drive the perception for the whole year, and then really even they don't drive the perception as much as people's preseason judgments.
Right. And that handful of games just isn't enough to make any sort of definitive conclusions, because I mean neither of these were inter-conference games, but I'm just thinking of Clemson, Syracuse. Ishan, you pointed out that was just kind of a weird, funky game. I'm also thinking of Penn State, Michigan State, another weird, funky game. That was the one with like the 3-hour lightning delay in Lansing. It was just kind of a strange game, and those things can happen in the one-offs when you have a limited interconference schedule. And so it's very hard for a committee to say, oh yeah, this is the better team or this is the better conference based on the limited sample we have of interconference play.
Totally. And that's also not even what they're doing. Like the SEC basically as a conference had one good non-conference win, which was Georgia's 1-point win against Notre Dame.
Which in retrospect is not actually that good of a win, given that Notre Dame was mostly a mirage.
Yeah, I mean, Stanford was the runner-up in the Pac-12, and they beat Notre Dame by 18, and Miami was the way runner-up in the ACC, and they beat Notre Dame by 30. So you could argue that the SEC had one good win, which wasn't even that good of a win, and they have two teams in the playoffs. So first of all, we only have a handful of non-conference games, and second of all, they're not even really driving the narrative at the end of the season.
Yeah, and speaking of the narrative, we've talked about Ohio State and how it may have deserved to get in that slot instead of Alabama, but we haven't talked about USC at all. So do you guys think that USC just got shortchanged here because they are a conference champion? They beat a good Stanford team. And they have two losses like Ohio State, but I think they have just as strong, maybe not just as strong, at least almost as strong of a case to be made for that fourth spot as Ohio State did.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that they also had a 35-point loss to Notre Dame. Yeah, I think they had a similar case to Ohio State. I think one thing that was going against USC, in my opinion, is that their conference schedule did not include Washington, so they didn't even beat the other top-ranked team in the Pac-12, whereas Ohio State beat Penn State and Wisconsin, the other top teams in their conference. So that's why I just gave Ohio State a slight edge over USC, but I think it's fair to put both those teams ahead of the one-loss non-champions.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing to add on that. I agree. My only concern as we're having this debate, guys, is we keep talking about how much we need this to be objective again. My fear is we're going to try to pivot this towards a larger team playoff, which we can all agree we like. But I'm worried we'll start to get back towards BCS level objectivity, where it's not very transparent, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it's still important to note here that as bad as this year looks like it's kind of turning out with the number 4 seed, this is still a heck of a lot better than we had in 2013, 2014. I mean, what we're looking at right now is it would be Clemson in the national championship game for the third year in a row, playing Oklahoma, which would be good, but leaving out Georgia and whoever the number 4 seed would be. So I think we're still moving in the right direction, but we need to be careful about how objective we want to get with these final rankings.
Well, I mean that's a good point, but you have to believe that the College Football Playoff Committee is using spreadsheets and decision matrices and some sort of concrete calculation to arrive at least an informal ranking, right? I mean, it's the only difference between that and the BCS system, which is certainly flawed, is that we don't know what their criteria are exactly. Like they tell us conference championships matter, they tell us head-to-head records matter, but then they also have this sort of this all-encompassing caveat that if one team is what's the word they use, like in basically significantly better or indisputably better, than the tiebreakers don't apply. And that's a pretty opaque process. So, I mean, I agree that this playoff is moving in a good direction away from the BCS, I think that having an 18 playoff where you just have automatic bids for conference champions, and then you have a committee use this vague, amorphous, opaque process to determine 2 or 3 at-large bids, that's even better than what we've got now by a long shot.
Yep, I agree.
First, if this were a 2-team playoff, there is no way Oklahoma would be in it. SEC bias is strong enough that you can bet anything that Georgia would have been put ahead of Oklahoma if the cutoff was at 2 rather than 4. Second of all, I think you mixed in 2 concepts there when you were comparing the BCS to the new thing. One concept is, do we have 2 teams or 4 teams? And I think we all agree 4 teams is better. But then another concept is how we pick those. And I actually think the BCS was picking teams in a better way with a worse overall outcome because there's only 2 teams. But if Zach were right and they were using spreadsheets and numbers to inform their decision, there's no way Alabama would be in the playoff. There's no numbers by which Alabama had a better season than Ohio State overall.
Well, but this is what I think is happening, though. I think they're in their room with the shades drawn. They have their spreadsheet, and then they add that final human preference value in their decision matrix to account for SEC deficiencies. So, and that the problem is that it's opaque, right? Because we can't actually see. So with the BCS, we can see, we understand the formula. It's a complicated, messy formula, but it's a formula that's transparent to a degree, but we can't see what exactly the CFP committee is doing, and that makes it a worse system in my mind.
I agree. The one other thing is, I think you can be objective without being super complicated. So if there's something about winning conference championships, that would be, whether or not that's the right way to do it, that's an example of like an objective criteria that's not super complicated.
Yeah, and I think that's got to be the right way to do it, because why else do we have conferences, right?
I agree.
Valid. So let's circle back real quick. This SEC bias that everyone keeps talking about. Where's the SEC bias coming from these days? I've seen so many debates on this over the past day that this is ESPN's doing, that this is NCAA's doing. I don't know. I'm sure we'll blame it on Twitter at some point. Like, where's this SEC bias that we all like to yell and scream about actually coming from? And what is the no kidding effects? Because you look at who made up the college football playoff committee, and the Ohio State athletic director, obviously he was recused from a lot of these discussions. He was sitting in there. I mean, we had athletic directors all over the country. What is the SEC bias that we're talking about these days? Because I seem to have this debate all the time, and I don't really know where it's originating from.
Yeah, well, the first point I would make, and probably the only one I'm going to make on this point, because I don't have a great answer for you, but I do think that there's not necessarily a conscious bias, but that there's this cognitive bias that a lot of commentators and students of the sport have, that because the SEC has been great in the past, or has had X number of national championships, because Nick Saban's a great coach who's competing with Bear Bryant as the greatest Alabama coach ever. Because of those things, the SEC is great, and Alabama is a great football team. I think those cognitive biases, even if they're unconscious, definitely come into play, even if people are trying to avoid that.
Yeah, I have generally a similar opinion. I think there's 2 separate questions. One is like, can we observe the SEC bias in the way that decision-making preferences the SEC? And then 2 is, can we explain it? Do we have some sort of model of like why this exists in our head? And I think I haven't really thought about the second one very much, but like one possible model is, there's some cool studies on refs in baseball and basketball, and why home court advantage helps. And basically the research shows that home court advantage generally doesn't affect anything like player shooting percentages or, amount of hard hit balls. But there's a few, I'm sort of paraphrasing the research generally, but there's a few key calls a game that are slightly more likely to go to the home team. And there's kind of this effect where refs are influenced by the home crowd and make slightly more calls in favor of the home team, because human beings don't like to be booed by 30,000 people.
Yeah, I remember in college one time, my classmates and I tried this. We had the room divided into 2 halves, unbeknownst to our teacher, and we agreed over email, like in class, I don't condone this. This is a bad thing for students to do. You should pay attention to your teachers instead of emailing each other. But we decided that when the teacher was on one side of the room, that half of the class would have puzzled looks on their faces, like they didn't know what she was talking about. And then when she moved to the other side of the room, all of us would be nodding along in agreement, like we were tracking with her, and we'd smile. And sure enough, over the course of about 15 minutes, she just strayed over to the happy side of the room where everyone was acting engaged and agreeing and nodding along with her, and would just stop moving to the other side of the room entirely. So she would just anchor on one side because she was responding to the positive reactions from the students. So it worked.
Yeah, that's a good story. Yeah, so my general vague idea, I don't really have a ton of evidence for this, is just that SEC fans care more about college football than fans of any of the other conferences, and they're, in person, at college game day, on Twitter, in email, whatever, however the various ways that these people on TV, these talking heads, get feedback from people, they're the loudest and most vocal fans, and so little by little, they're pushing people to the direction of not wanting to annoy them. That's like one possible influence. I don't really have a strong opinion on what causes SEC bias overall.
I think that's a great point, though. Let's move on to our next segment, Garbage Time. All right, guys, so that was a great discussion in Heart of the Order. I'm excited to see how this all pans out. This segment now is a place for us to talk about stuff that we wanted to talk about in the previous order, perhaps, or stuff we just want to get off our chest before we end the show. I'll kick things off. I just want to talk about how disappointed I am in Gronk for hitting the rookie Tre'Davious White in the back of the head when he's on the ground after making an interception. I mean, so Gronk's a 28-year-old guy. He's been in the league long enough to know that's absolutely unacceptable. And he's got to be a role model for younger guys in the league. And he's not doing that when he is getting frustrated at an interception. He said he was frustrated at an earlier pass interference penalty, and then just clubbing a guy in the back of the head. I just saw his suspension was handed down by the NFL, so he's going to be out the Patriots next game. Absolutely deserved. I'm really puzzled as to why the ref in the game did not eject him on the spot, because it was definitely deserved. But just really disappointing, a really disappointing performance from Gronk there. I like watching Gronk. He's an amazing tight end to play the game, but I am much less of a Gronk fan after watching that outburst.
I'm a little disappointed only a 1-game suspension. I know if you're a fantasy football player or a Pats fan, 1 game seems like definitely enough. But man, we talk about suspending Aqib Talib for his fight 2 weeks ago for at least 2 weeks, and obviously that got appealed down. But NFL just comes out with a little slap on the wrist, 1 game. The Patriots are running away with that division, so it doesn't even hurt them. I mean, gosh, the NFL brand every week seems to take a hit, and I mean, what is my incentive right now where I'm watching cheap shots and dudes get hurt, fights on the sidelines? The NFL needs to figure out what the priorities are here. I mean, remind me of his name on the ground when he got hit. I didn't write that down. I'm sorry. Who Gronk hit? Remind me.
Tre'Davious White.
Yeah, he was officially downgraded to a concussion status this morning. Yeah. I saw. So, yep. I mean, I thought we cared about concussions in the NFL. I thought we cared about player safety. I thought we thought about protecting the shield. Where is this NFL? Like, what are we doing here, guys? So,
by the way, I have an idea.
That made me mad.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have an idea for getting the NFL to have a little movement on this effort for player safety, especially in the concussion realm. And I think that we should refer to all concussions as brain injuries, because that's what they are. And so when a player's out for concussion or in the concussion protocol, we should just call it what it is and say that the player's out with a brain injury or they're in the brain injury protocol, because that's exactly what it is. And it's just really kind of putting a nice gloss over it when we say they have a concussion. Like they were just the result. They were just the victim of a slightly concussive force, but they'll be fine. They'll be back next week. No, they actually have a brain injury, and that's something that they could have a life's worth of after effects from.
So first of all, that's a great idea. Second of all, I just want to say that this is, a consistent pattern for the NFL. The Gronk thing, I think, is getting more attention because he's a more famous player. But as a Bears fan, I had the distinct opposite of a privilege of watching Danny Trevathan put, in my view, a much worse hit on Devontae Adams of the Packers.
Yeah, that was terrible.
I thought the Trevathan hit was the kind of hit that could paralyze or kill someone.
I thought it might have when I saw it happen to Adams. I mean, the fact that he was, I think it was able to give a thumbs up to the crowd as he left the stadium was surprising to me, because I was scared when I saw that hit.
Yeah, so the NFL just doesn't care about what its violence is doing to people, and I think a good conversation for a future episode that will not fit into garbage time is why it's morally okay to keep watching football.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. I've given a lot of thought to that question.
Me too. I've been confronted with that by a lot of non-football watching nerd friends recently.
Yeah. No, that's definitely worth our time.
Just think about this. James Harrison makes that hit. He's suspended 4 or 5 games at least. I know he's a quote unquote repeat offender, but James Harrison's out for the rest of the season based on how the NFL perceives him as a player versus how they perceive Gronk. Obviously, patterns are important, but yeah, the NFL is not doing themselves any favors for the fan base. Couldn't agree more, guys.
But fortunately, Roger Goodell is going to get paid, $50 million a year and get a private jet, or $50 million, and a private jet to fix all this stuff. So I'm sure it'll be fine.
Man, I could screw things up for a lot less.
There's now a tax credit for expenses related to private jets too, so extra bonus.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what he needed. All right. Well, that's all I had for garbage time. Do you guys have anything before we move to the shootout?
Hey, real quick, I'd like to bring up all the coaching carousels going on. So just something that I'd like to throw
great
out for
topic,
you guys is obviously we've talked about coaching shakeups in really every conference for the last couple weeks, but nothing I think has been more interesting and, at least on my side, unnerving than watching what happened in Tennessee last week. So obviously we took last week off from the pod. Tennessee decides to hire Greg Schiano out of Ohio State, their defensive coordinator. Who, before the news is even officially released, so someone leaks it out of the Tennessee camp that they're hiring him, the students, mainly the students, I think obviously some athletic boosters as well, start retweeting and running reports about how Greg Schiano was involved in the Penn State sexual assault issues with Jerry Sandusky going all the way back to the 80s and 90s, but really came to a head in the late 2000s, and that Schiano possibly covered it up. And within the matter of 4.5 hours, the students have gotten enough retweets and pushed this article enough times that the Greg Schiano camp and the Tennessee camp mutually agree that they don't want to press on this and they back off the contract. And I don't know what the status is now, but at one point there were reports that Tennessee was going to owe Greg Schiano $20 million for his entire buyout by backing off. Obviously, that's probably going to get negotiated down, but
yeah, no doubt.
It's terrifying. I mean, in some ways, social media is fantastic. All three of us use social media, and all three of us, I think, really enjoy it. But this was a report that was technically unverified. I understand Tennessee's point of view that they can't have a guy who could possibly be connected to that. So about 5% of me understands Tennessee's side on this. But overall, it is terrifying that an unverified report spread like wildfire that quickly and potentially ruined Greg Schiano's coaching future. I think he'll be okay if he gets $20 million. But the Tennessee Athletic Department is a dumpster fire right now, to put it nicely. But this coaching carousel this year has been more interesting than anything I can remember. And I think it all came to a head with how badly, interestingly enough, an SEC school who normally runs these things better, but how badly this can go when boosters get involved and the athletic department supposedly has some collusion between some of the high up boosters about getting the AD out. And it was a fiasco what was going on in Knoxville this week.
Yeah, it was just when the first news broke about Greg Schiano, and then you saw the outrage beginning to pour in. It was just like from that point forward, every day there was a bigger headline regarding what was going on in Tennessee. And yeah, garbage fire, I think, is a great way to describe it. But your point about the court of public opinion is well taken. And I mean, look, yeah, obviously you can't have a coach there who has been involved in the types of things that people are accusing Greg Schiano of being involved in. I totally understand that as well. I think a lot of this is Tennessee not doing due diligence in their search, both making sure that that's a coach that Tennessee boosters would want to have, and making sure that coach doesn't have any red flags in the background. But the bigger point of yours is also a good one, Pete. I think that this is a scary day and age we have in which an unverified report can go a long way towards ruining someone's career or ruining someone's life. So yeah, important stuff. All right, well, yeah, just real quick, actually, I'll add a little bit on the coaching carousel. Pete, I have to give you credit for mentioning Scott Frost to Nebraska a while back. And I guess
I finally got one.
I guess retrospectively that's a pretty obvious choice for Frost since he's a Husker. And I was wrong. I was hoping he'd go to Florida. I wanted the Chip Kelly coaching tree at Florida, even if Chip Kelly wasn't going there. But I think Scott Frost will do well in Nebraska, so we'll follow with interest. It would be good to see Nebraska become a
I
power again. It's just kind of sad to see what's become of that program. They're not good, and they haven't been for a long time.
and I think we need these big historic programs to come back. Say you will about Miami and the turnover chain, or USC with all the issues with Pete Carroll and Reggie Bush in the mid 2000s. It's good for college football when these big time teams are doing something. I think Nebraska is one of those teams who we think of as a powerhouse, and they need an identity. They need to be back. It's more fun when those kind of programs are up. So I'm excited about that hire.
Yeah, the other hire I want to talk about briefly is Jimbo Fisher, who took a historically large contract to go to Texas A&M. And I saw a quote from him afterwards where he said, Texas A&M wasn't even on my radar until I started researching the program. And I'm like, dude, give me a break. It was definitely on your radar. And it wasn't your research of the program that made you realize what a great historic program it is. It was the dollar signs they threw at you. That's exactly what it was. I mean, when someone says we'll pay you $70 million to come here, that's just more money than most coaches are going to refuse.
Well, and then did you see what he was saying in his press conference, not naming Florida State by name, but talking about how the administration didn't back him.
Yes.
And you can have all these great players and all. I mean, the facilities at Florida State are fantastic. He had top 5 recruiting classes for 4 straight years. He won a national title in 2015. Like, dude, call a spade a spade. You lost your starting quarterback. The season got away from you. You clearly
and someone
were butting
offered
heads
you a
with
lot
people
more money
in charge. Yeah, and you had what you thought was a better deal. I would be nervous if I was an A&M fan with how quickly he jumped out of Tallahassee.
Yeah, and not just that, but how his players responded. I don't know if you saw DeAndre Francois' tweet, but he basically said, could have at least given me a phone call. So he didn't even tell his quarterback before he jumped ship, and it was announced that he was moving to A&M. So not a good situation at Florida State, not a good situation for Florida State fans.
Well, and don't forget, A&M ran Kevin Sumlin out on a decent season, not a great season, but they ran Kevin Sumlin out. So, dude, you're jumping in the arms of someone who's also not the most trustworthy in terms of a relationship.
Great point. I did see, by the way, that UCF is saying they're going to most aggressively pursue Kevin Sumlin because that's who they want. So the coaching carousel whirls around and around we go.
Come on, Lane Kiffin, do something fun.
I know. Great Twitter follow. All right, well, let's move on to the shootout. All right, so the shootout, let's each just queue up 3 questions. We'll just pitch 3 questions to each other, and we'll go from there. So kind of rapid fire, instant reactions. These are all unscripted, unplanned, so we'll see what our instincts are. My first question to each of you, we talked about Shohei Ohtani. Where do you think Ohtani ends up in 2018?
Cubs.
I'm going Cubs too.
Wow, you guys both going Cubs. Okay, I'm going Padres. So I'm voting for San Diego. We'll see what happens. I'm voting West Coast.
The small town market,
he's gonna want that relatively quick Pacific flight back home. The small town market where he can be a superstar. The wonderful weather in San Diego. I'm calling the Padres. We'll see what happens.
Like it.
All right, Pete, what you got?
Gentlemen, so some drama with Eli Manning here over the past week and a half. Didn't have time for it today on the podcast. He was sat that they ran Bamagate out of town. Just announced Eli Manning will start again for the Giants here this next week. Gentlemen, in September 2018, will Eli Manning be wearing a Giants uniform?
Yes, I think he'll end his career as a Giant. I think he knows he doesn't have a whole lot of gas left. I'm going to go with yes, he will be wearing a Giants uniform and he'll retire as a Giant.
I'm going to go no. I think the Giants are a rebuilding team with an older quarterback, and there's no reason to keep the older quarterback around for a team that's not a contender. All right, so another baseball drama that's going on that we haven't talked about is where the Marlins are going to trade Giancarlo Stanton.
Yes.
It looks like the Cardinals are offering a lot of prospects and to take on a lot of his, $320 million left on his contract or something over the next 12 years?
Yep.
So it looks like the Cardinals are in on it. Looks like the Giants are in on it. Looks like Stanton, who's from Southern California, wants to go to the Dodgers if he can somehow finagle his way into forcing that. So where do you guys think he ends up?
I'm going to go Giants here. I think the Dodgers, even if they're his preferred destination, they have some significant luxury tax hurdles to get around. They already have the highest payroll in baseball. So I think they will ultimately have to pass just because of financial constraints. I think he would prefer to be in San Francisco over the Cards, and San Francisco's got a history of sluggers, so I'm going to go Giants.
Dude, I agree. I was kind of rooting for him to go to the Cardinals, but based on what he's been saying as well as what his camp's been saying, he's not interested in living in the Midwest. St. Louis is not a hitter's ballpark; it's a pitcher's ballpark. San Francisco, he's got that bigger market, obviously not the LA market, but yeah, Zach, I agree with all the reasons you said. I think he's going to San Francisco.
I just think the Giants, as a team that's spending a lot of money and does not have a lot of young talent, but has a lot of sort of mid-career talent, like Bumgarner and Posey, they're kind of desperate to get back to the top of the heap as soon as possible after their last place finish last year. So I see the Giants making as many big splashes as they can this offseason. So I think they pursue him the hardest, and he ends up going there eventually.
All right, number 2 for me. So there's a big coaching vacancy at Florida State now since Jimbo Fisher left. Who is going to be coaching at Florida State in 2018?
I have no idea. I don't really do the coaching carousel.
Fair enough. There's been talk of Willie Taggart at Oregon, which I think is an intriguing idea. I don't know if I buy it. I think there's little reason to leave Oregon for FSU. But what do you think, Pete?
I was going with Willie only because he's the only name I'm seeing that's surfacing right now that seems to have any traction whatsoever. I have been told that I got spoofed with a Twitter tweet. Is that what we call it? A Twitter tweet? That had a fake flight plan showing him going into Tallahassee. But I don't think Oregon's going to let him go. So here's to Lane Kiffin going to FSU. That's 2 Lane Kiffin mentions.
Lane Kiffin to FSU. Wow, you heard it here first. I'm not going to endorse that rumor, but you heard it here first. If you end up being right, Pete, I'll support you, but until then, I can't.
I bring up
right.
Lane Kiffin so much, I have to get one eventually. I have to.
You do, yeah, it's true. Just every coaching vacancy, you're going to call Lane Kiffin. All right, what's your number 2?
Let's stick with Florida State. So going to A&M, decent season this year. Gentlemen, Jimbo Fisher will play in the SEC title game within the next 2 years at Texas A&M. True or false?
False.
False. Yeah, I don't think it'll happen.
They lost to UCLA. They have a long way to go.
Yeah, 2 years is a pretty quick turnaround too. I'm going to say false.
So follow on question, not part of the shootout, but follow on question. If he's not getting to the SEC championship game in the next 3 years, do they run him out of College Station?
I mean, that's a lot of money on the contract. I think I'd really have to see how the contract's structured to make an educated guess on that. If they're going to owe him a massive buyout, it'd be pretty hard. But if they have a way where they can mutually part ways with less money owed, I mean, I think it would just depend on what the details of the contract are. I've just seen the grand total of the contract. I haven't seen the breakdown, so I don't know. All right, Ishan, what's your number 2?
So other than the obvious of the college football playoff and Stanford TCU, which I will be attending in San Antonio with my family, which bowl game are you guys most excited about?
I'll start out. I'm actually really interested to see Penn State and Washington in the Fiesta Bowl. I think that's an intriguing matchup, kind of based on the styles of play that the two teams play. I think it's not a matchup we would ever get during the regular season. Obviously, us going back to talking about who you want to match up in these games. I think that is going to be a fun matchup to watch. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I would also have said that one because I'm a Penn State fan, but I'll disqualify myself from that answer because that's too obvious for me. I would say probably Ohio State, USC. I'm really intrigued by this USC team. It seems like they turned on the Jets at the end of the year. They obviously won the Pac-12 title. So this is, Pac-12 champion, Pac-10 or Big Ten champion, each of which were shut out of the playoff, and they're playing for bragging rights here. And they're really playing to make a statement that they should have been included in the playoffs. So I'm looking forward to Ohio State, USC.
Yeah, so I think those are the 2 games I'm most excited about too. Just to highlight a third one, I'll go with Auburn UCF. I guess we're all uncreatively picking New Year's 6 games, but I think that it'll be fun to see if an undefeated non-Power 5 team can hang with the SEC runner-up.
Yeah, and I've been a fan of UCF all year. I've been talking about them and complaining that they're not getting enough respect. They weren't getting enough respect from the committee all throughout. I mean, I never thought they should have been in the playoff, but I think like a top 10 ranking would have been appropriate earlier than the end of the year. But I give UCF about a 5% chance of victory in that game. I think Auburn's going to overpower them. But it'll be an interesting game. I'm excited to watch that as well. All right, final question for me, guys. What happens first? The Patriots lose or the Browns win?
Browns win.
Going bold here.
Patriots lose.
Okay. All right. We'll see.
Oh, I forgot the Browns play the Bears next week. Never mind.
Nice.
I've been watching a lot of painful Bears games here in Chicago. My late Sunday afternoons have been pretty moody around here.
Yeah, losing to Jimmy Garoppolo yesterday was.
Robbie Gould.
Yep, that's right. Garoppolo's good though. I'm excited to see him as a quarterback. I think he's the real deal. I'm still amazed that the Patriots traded him away for what they did. I mean, it seems like pennies, given that he looks like a consistent quarterback who could be your starter for 5 to 10 years. So, I don't know. But all right, let's finish this shootout up.
All right, we've asked a lot of serious questions. You guys know I'm really not all about that life. So, looking at our boy Baker Mayfield, who's poised to make a pretty solid Heisman run here with the ballots being due today. True or false, Baker Mayfield, when he wins the Heisman, will cry during his acceptance speech in order to try to start bolstering his NFL image?
I'm going to say false. No, I think he's just too cocky. I don't think he has it in him to work up fake tears in his acceptance speech.
Totally agree.
Do you think he'll grab his groin then?
I think he probably has enough self-awareness to know that would not boost his NFL image or draft stock, so I'm going to go with no. And we'll wrap it up there, gentlemen. Thanks again for joining us on Third String Podcast. In the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter. Each of us have our own individual accounts, or you can follow at Third String Pod, and you can find us all there. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening to Third String Podcast.